All right, we're going to get started here. Welcome, everybody, to Peter White Public Library. My name is Marty Atkinson. I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator for the library. I just have to thank one group that allows me to do this live streaming, and that is the Friends of Peter White Public Library, who pay for the live streaming equipment. So if you are watching in YouTube land right now, you can thank the Friends of Peter White Public Library. Before I introduce Karen, I'm just going to go over a couple things that are upcoming this week and next. Tonight we have a blues concert on the steps outside. Yes, the weather is nice enough to have blues outside. So bring a blanket, bring a folding chair, come and listen to some great blues music by the group Baluze, Bahluze. So anyway, and then tomorrow night we have a traveling group called the Boston Imposters who are going to be doing another concert at 6:30 p.m. On the steps again, and the weather looks like it's going to cooperate. And it's going to be cooler tomorrow too, so that's a good thing. But the Boston Imposters, they sort of do Celtic / folky music, and that's going to be tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. And then on Thursday night at 6:30 p.m. downstairs in the community room, we have Jocelyn Benson, Secretary of State Benson, who is going to be coming to read from her recently published memoir, The Purposeful Warrior. Now, that is a ticketed event. You don't have to pay for the tickets, but you do have to have a ticket. So if you don't have a ticket, they are available downstairs at the circulation desk. There's a limit of 2 tickets per person, but I'll give you a little secret. If you walk away from the desk after getting your tickets and then you come back and say, I need 2 tickets to Jocelyn Benson, you'll probably get those tickets, okay? You don't have to put on a fake mustache or anything, I promise. Anyway, see, those are the loopholes I know, and I build into the system. And then next week, if you're interested in craft magic, we're doing felting that night, and that is Monday. It says Tuesday on the flyer, but it is Monday night, August 4th, and that's craft magic with Jody Trost. Always really wonderful. That is limited to 15 kits, I think. So if you are interested in that, please go and register as quickly as possible because those spots fill up very quickly. And then just to give you an overview of other things that are coming up in August, we have, for the concert on the steps, we have the Daryl Syria Project on August 13th. On August 20th, we have another traveling group called Gemini Moon, and they're sort of a male-female group that think Elle King, Jimi Hendrix, Fleetwood Mac, Cyndi Lauper rolled into one. They're really fantastic. So I know that's a weird mix, but that's what they do. That's what they do. They're sort of alt-rock kind of group. And then also we have a Blues Day Tuesday concert, and that is going to be the Flat Broke Blues Band at the end of August. So lots of great things coming up. Pick up one of these that lets you know what's coming up in August. But now I'm going to introduce the person that you are all here for. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Amy. Nice to see you. God, it's like old home week today. Karen Babine. I got it. I've pronounced that name so many different ways in the last month and a half. Babine. She's an assistant professor of English at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, which she's not looking forward to returning to in a little bit. It's a little warm down there right now. But anyway, she teaches writing and literature, creative writing and literature there. But she, in 2023, she received the Outstanding Teacher Award, which is a system-wide honor at the University of Tennessee. She has published 3 books. One was Water and What We Know, Following the Roots of Northern Life, and the second book was All the Wild Hungers, A Season of Cooking and Cancer, and both won the Minnesota Book Award for memoir and creative nonfiction. And you are all here to see her read and listen to her read from her wonderful new memoir, The Allure of Elsewhere, which, if you haven't picked it up, you need to pick it up. It is one of the best memoirs I've read in a very long time. So please give a big, warm Peter White Public Library welcome to Karen.
Thanks, Marty. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you all for coming. It is a great day to be talking about camping. So this book is about taking a solo camping trip from Minnesota to Nova Scotia to do some research on my dad's family, who were some of the first French-Acadians to Nova Scotia in the 1620s. So if you know the history of the Cajuns in Louisiana, they used to be the Acadians in Nova Scotia before the British deported them in 1755. So part of this is some family history, but also how do we tell stories as a family? And what does that look like when you are a solo person who is intentionally solo, but also the family historian and sort of the keeper of some of those stories? And what does that look like when you're trying to make stories for yourself into the future? So I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning, the middle, and the end, and hopefully that will give us some things to talk about towards the end. So I'm in the back seat of a black diesel Blazer with my two younger sisters. Dad is driving, Mom is navigating. It's July 1987, and we're driving through the Mojave Desert to San Diego to visit Dad's family, the California Babines, and it's our first major travel together as a family, and we're learning the peculiarities of what this kind of travel means. I'm 8, Christy is 6, Kim is 4. We don't have air conditioning because Dad just had the engine rebuilt, and he's worried about it overheating. And in the middle of the Mojave Desert, and temperatures past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and probably closer to 110, so we try to make do with the windows rolled down. From an 8-year-old view, there is nothing to see, the world empty and spreading out beyond sight to a place where you're not sure if it's mirage or real. It is intensely miserable, the kind of misery that melts animosity between small girls who prefer not to be sitting so close to each other, little legs imprinted with a rough cloth at the back seat, sticky skin scorched by metal seat belts that still somehow emotionally mark the 1980s on my skin. Bickering over which of the two of us would get to use the two red tape players who had to sit in the middle seat, and she's touching me. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. We like telling stories of how my sisters and I made up our own games on trips like these. There was a standard license plate game, which was always a little more fun when we hit national parks or stayed on Air Force bases, which is where we usually found Alaska and Hawaii. Once we got all 50 states, our reward was ice cream. I suspect we would have gotten ice cream anyway. Over the years, my sisters and I invented the quote game, which mostly consisted of somebody picking a movie, like The Princess Bride, and the first one not to be able to come up with a quote lost. Have fun storming the castle. Anybody want a peanut? As you wish. The first ones were easy, but once you got the easy ones out of the way, the quotes got harder and the game got more intense. I was from a land of lakes and trees, so deserts were a curiosity, petrified forest in 4 corners where we could stand in 4 states at once, and Mesa Verde, where we dipped into the coolness of kivas and thrilled at what it would have been like to living in that place and time. But on days like this, when little girls are too hot to even argue, the vast open landscape is not interesting. It is simply space to move through on your to somewhere else. When we finally drive into Needles, California, our suffering is rewarded with Dairy Queen, and I remember how the 40-degree change in temperature from outside to inside made me a little nauseous. Even now, I can still feel that knowledge in my body, my belly, that memory, that place. They were an exotic dream, this family of California Babines, the way people become in your imagination. We rarely got to see them, but we knew where they lived because California was special. We saw it on television and movies all the time. They lived just north of San Francisco, land of cable cars, sourdough, and Alcatraz. They drove the Golden Gate Bridge, ate See's candy and Ghirardelli chocolate. I grew up in small-town Minnesota, where our biggest claim to fame in Nevis was as the home of the world's largest tiger muskie. And when people came to visit us, we took them 20 miles away to see the headwaters of the Mississippi River. We ate lefse and venison and wild rice. Everything that was important in the world was elsewhere, not here. California, or the East Coast, was where a person went when they grew up, gained reason. The California Babines we were going to see were a family to pin stories and hopes of stories on because they were the aunts and uncles and cousins that I always wanted but didn't have in Minnesota because my mom was an only child. There was a part of me that desperately wanted to belong to a large, boisterous family who had large, boisterous gatherings, energetic events of deep generational memory making. My dad had 3 brothers and a sister, and each had families full of cousins who were nearly the same age as my sisters and me. I always wanted best friend cousins the way that I saw in my books. I was the oldest, and while Christy, Kim, and I played together well, generally got along, had great imaginations that led to epic adventures, sisters were not cousins. The life of the California Babines was the kind we read in books, stories we saw on television when we watched Full House on TGIF every Friday. The Allure of Elsewhere. It was a concept I knew before I had words for it. When we went to stores, we could find giant framed photographs of New York, or Paris, or San Francisco, never the Minneapolis skyline or the Stone Arch Bridge. Stories I read were never set in Minnesota, and I wouldn't learn until college that the first American to win the Nobel Prize in Literature was a Minnesotan. There's your trivia for today. High culture happened in New York, or Los Angeles, or Seattle, or New Orleans, not St. Paul, elsewhere. When Starbucks started its You Are Here mug series, I was irrationally excited to see the Twin Cities represented, but unless you specifically went to a local gift shop, you weren't going to find I Heart Minneapolis or Grey Duck t-shirts. The place I grew up in was the butt of jokes, full of unsophisticated people and bland food, with a football team whose blowing of a field goal in 1999 in the NFC Championship still causes Minnesotans acute pain. We haven't won a World Series since 1991, though the Twins did win the World Series in '87 on my birthday. We had to laugh at ourselves. Everybody else did. Once I applied for a job on the East Coast, and they asked me in the interview if I'd ever lived in a city before, and I was living in Minneapolis. California, and the West in general, was important. Everything I read told me so, even as I died of dysentery nearly every time I played the Oregon Trail. So I set out on this camping trip and packed my 2 cats, who were not big fans of this idea. My camper is a 13-foot Scamp camper, so it is molded fiberglass. It's kind of funky looking. And my favorite thing about the cover, it's got a Scamp on the cover, so it makes me very happy. And Maeve was my Siamese, and she never met an opinion she didn't feel the need to share. And Galway was scared of everything. Bad ideas on both ends. But this is the first day of major driving through Ontario. Maybe I should have suspected that the drive from Thunder Bay to Sault Ste. Marie wouldn't go as planned when the morning started out with a moose on the side of the road, just standing there like a discarded early draft of an idea for an animal, as the essayist Paul Grucco once described them. I can't remember if I've ever seen a moose before in the wild. I don't think I have. And it's really easy to forget how enormous they are until the next time I watch the opening credits of Northern Exposure. I wish I could have gotten a picture of it, just standing there, peacefully, in the ditch, just watching the world in a weirdly shaped camper go by, but that doesn't happen when you're at speed and you well past the moose before you figure out that you're not hallucinating. I'm not hallucinating. That was a moose. The cats are not impressed, and this strikes me as one of the principal irritations of traveling and camping alone, the collective shared exclamation of, "Did you see that?" And there's literally nobody to share it with. I won't say that the moose was as cliched a moment as "we're not in Minnesota anymore, Maeve," but it was close. I left Kakabeka Falls about 7:45 a.m., and my main goal was to keep an eye on the gas tank en route to Sault Ste. Marie, which would take me about 8 hours. This was the plan. And I planned it very carefully, because having a plan is the principal way I manage being on the road alone. Everything is managed, down to the smallest detail, with color-coded Post-it notes. There isn't a whole lot of sightseeing or good reasons to stop between Thunder Bay and Sault Ste. Marie, so I decided to push through. It would be a long, ugly day of driving, but there were no good alternatives. I ate my oatmeal, filled my big green Stanley thermos with very strong Earl Grey, put the cats in their kennels, broke camp, and headed out. Maeve vomited before we got to the gates of the park, as per usual, so at least I had a handy trash can ready. Death, taxes, Maeve. Galway stared judgmentally from his kennel on the front seat. We were off to a good start. Traveling with cats is an adventure. The status of the gas tank was a priority. Yesterday, I went in search of gas and could not get either my debit or my credit card to work, and my anxiety increased to the point where I thought I could feel electricity in the ends of my hair. Later, I would realize that the fear fizzing in my blood was not one of actual physical danger, but a much more psychologically gendered fear. I'm not afraid on the road in a physical way, but I'm fighting a fear of failure, a fear of looking like an idiot, a fear of running out of the gas on the side of the road and facing the snark often aimed at women drivers. It's as potent a fear as any other. I fear problems and conundrums I can't think my way out of, because as a solo person, if I can't do it, it doesn't get done. I'd rather drive well-traveled roads to get where I'm going than the scenic route, because to be truly alone with no way to access help is my greatest fear. I went to a different gas station. The card reader still didn't like my card, and so with increasing desperation and with the stress starting to create that tunnel vision I recognized, I went inside. I was running out of gas, and I only had American dollars. It must have shown on my face. No problem, said the cashier. Just pump your gas, and we'll call the bank if we need to. The adrenaline rush of relief made my fingers tingle. Okay, I said, thank you. I filled the tank and put some 50 liters in, $80 worth, and inside the store the cashier ran my card and it worked fine. Maybe it helped that the cashier was female, that the panic of the morning's hunt for gas had been so easily solved, but the answer to the problem was that Canada had switched to chip cards, which would not be common in the States for another year or two. It was a moment of relief so intense that I could feel tears building in my chest. I resolved never to let this happen again. From the back seat, Maeve snarked that this is twice in the last couple of days that I had lost my mind over gas, first in Two Harbors and then again today. I said her commentary was unnecessary. About 1 o'clock, I'm in Wawa, which is about halfway to Sault Ste. Marie, and the sign says that the 17 is closed south of Wawa for emergency repairs. There are sinkholes in the road. There's a detour, so instead of 3.5 hours left in my day, I'm looking at least 4.5. On an old logging road, the nice young lady at the visitor center tells me, but I don't really know what that means. It's uncomfortable, but what's the alternative? I'd already seen some spectacular scenery, granite and gorges, and the kind of impact I'd forgotten landscapes could have. I'd been living on the Great Plains in Nebraska and on the Red River Valley of Minnesota, North Dakota for the last several years, and had learned to appreciate the scope of that particular landscape, so it's necessary to have my senses recalibrated. The sun is bright, the sky is blue, I have snacks and tea and water and a porta potty, and other than the basic inconvenience of it all, there's no reason to get overly upset about a detour. We don't tell stories about the things that went well, after all. I'm on a road trip, an adventure. This is all part of what comes with putting wheels to the road, even if I had a plan. The moose should have been a sign. What I learned on this day driving the detour from Thunder Bay is that old logging road means narrow, winding, and at turns straight up terrifying, as I try to match the speed I feel safest pulling a camper against the giant trucks tucked up against the scamp's butt that want to go faster. Under normal circumstances, I'd pull off on the side of the road to let them pass, because I've been taught the etiquette of the road from a young age. But the road has no shoulders. No margin for error, not even inches. When the scamp, the cats, and I get to the tiny town of Chapleau, I pass it thinking I'm okay on gas, but then a very small sign tells me that there would be no gas for 120 kilometers, so I turn around, make a U-turn in the middle of the road with a camper, which I'm very proud of, and I go back and fill up the tank. This turns out to be a very good idea. There's no way I would have made it to Thessalon without a full tank of gas, and I relearned this important lesson of the road. Never let the gas tank go below a third. This is usually advice I follow in the winter, not the summer. I'm fairly sure that the rivers, the trees, the wildflowers, the steepness of hillsides painted to dappled sun are beautiful, but I don't really notice as I white-knuckle the steering wheel, tunnel vision tight around my ears. I'm pretty sure that what I'm not looking at hasn't changed in several 100,000 years, like there's the planet's fingerprints right in front of me, but now's not a good time to look or think much about anything that's not straight out my windshield or in my rear view, and intellectually I know why. On one of our early family camping trips, we rented our friend's pop-up and took it to Winnipeg, where the camper came off the Blazer's hitch in the middle of Winnipeg traffic. And even though I know intellectually that my dad had the wrong size ball for the hitch, it's a sense memory I can't shake when I'm pulling this scamp. Even though I know that the hitch ball is the right size, it's locked down tight, and there's no way it's coming loose. I know this. And Dad taught me from the beginning to always cross the safety chains, though at the time he swears he told me is to catch the hitch if it comes off. And Winnipeg was 20 years ago, and this should be not be a thing that's lodged in my belly, but I'm carrying this fear nonetheless, right there, sharp, under my ribs. I don't even remember the event itself, so how do we carry things we don't remember? He says later, I hope that when you remember it, you just remember I never lost my cool. and I got to buy a new crescent wrench to fix it. I don't actually remember the event at all, I say. I remember the experience of it, not the event. My body remembers it, but my mind doesn't. I've learned the lesson of Winnipeg, but on this particular road, I don't know if the lesson will hold. I crossed the line between the Arctic watershed and the Atlantic watershed a couple of times, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, sun sliding and dancing through the canopy of trees on both sides of ye old logging road. The Laurentian Divide is the northern divide, the point at which water north of this point flows up to Hudson Bay. Water south of this point flows towards the Gulf of Mexico, or given that I'm directly north of the Great Lakes, water flows toward the Gulf of St. Lawrence. I've passed continental divides many times before, but I've only noticed the east-west. I feel a little silly to realize they operate on north-south too. Given how much time I've spent on the Red River of the North and Fargo-Moorhead, waiting for the spring thaws to trigger a flood. The Laurentian Divide goes through Lake Traverse, and the Bois de Sioux River flows north from the lake, and what will become the Minnesota River flows south from the lake. Then it zigzags north of Lake Superior so that its watershed flows south. I find these dividing lines compelling. I wonder, too, about this Acadian Babine patrilineal line I'm driving toward, fathers and brothers, and how the women I descend from disappear, how hard it is to trace their lines, how much I wondered about them. I look at the records I find of women marrying at 15 or 16, bearing 10 or 12 or 14 children until their husbands died, and then they remarry and continue to bear more children. And yet, the lines I can follow are male, and this family of men descends into a constellation of women and girls and mothers, and women who choose not to become mothers, and who instead buy a small camper to explore a world that is full of curiosities. I know that the land I'm driving toward, the land my great-grandfather left, moves twice a day under the force of the Bay of Fundy's tides. It's delightfully paradoxical to be driving toward a place that is a family origin point, a family historical fixed point, that is not exactly fixed to its landscape, a journey in reverse. I know where we are, but I don't know where we were influenced who we became before my great-grandfather, Bill Sr., moved to a land of earthquakes and winds and wildfires. There's a photograph of the family in the late 1930s, and characteristically, my grandfather is taking this very seriously, and his brother Walt is grinning. But I grew up in the land of the Canadian Shield, and the land I'm driving across now is the oldest exposed land on the planet, some of which is as old as 4.2 billion years, the rock bare like an exposed nerve, too sensitive. The glaciers of the last ice age scraped it clean to the bedrock, carving grooves into the surface, laying its mark. This isn't land that moves. This is land that other things move across. So part of this book is doing this research into the family. And so the crux of the question of how we tell stories came from my mom's family just told stories just as a matter of breathing. My dad's family was very different, and it struck me as stories are something we have to unlearn to tell, that it's not part of our natural self not to tell stories. But when I started digging, I realized that there was really good reasons for why that side of the family didn't tell stories. I walked very naively into my dad's office when I was 17 with a very crudely family tree and wondered why his grandmother and his uncle had the same death date. And I did not expect the answer to be murder. My grandpa's father was drafted, he was born in Nova Scotia, drafted by the Americans for World War I, and I suspect he went to France. I can't prove it, because the National Archives records repository burned in the 70s, so there's only 5 to 10% of World War I records that still exist, and so trying to dig into some of this archival work to try to figure out, like, who is the person behind all of this? Because after my grandpa and his brother went to boot camp in 1943, Bill Sr. was drafted in the 4th draft, the old man's draft for World War II. And after the boys left for boot camp, he died by suicide. He was not going back. And so one of the pieces that I wrestled with in this book is this idea that silence is not always a failure. My friend Jim will say this, that we have to respect where gaps exist, because sometimes that's the story that is being told. Mark Doty's got a quote that if there are gaps in memory, let it be part of the telling. which is another thing that I sort of wrestled with in here, that there's gaps in the research that I wanted to do into my great-grandfather. I've got all kinds of suppositions, but then trying to explore that in this Nova Scotia landscape. One of my favorite bits is in the fossil records, there's fossils from when we are in the primordial ooze, and there are fossils from when we are on land, but there's no fossils from the transition period. It's called Romer's Gap. And so if there are fossils, they're either at Blue Beach in Nova Scotia or there's a place in Scotland. I was like, oh, well, I'm going to go flip some rocks and see what happens. I did not solve Romer's Gap. But wrestling with this idea of Romer's Gap not being a failure as I'm trying to wrestle with these pieces of my great-grandfather's story that I will never know, and being okay with that as the story as opposed to a failure of research or knowing or storytelling. And so that leads back into taking all this data that I had and putting faces back to it, like restoring humanity to names and dates and places. Because as I tell my students, history is only boring when you forget it's about real people. And that seems important. So I'm just going to read a little bit from my last night in Nova Scotia. And apologies to anybody who speaks French. I'm going to butcher all of this. Say it in French, Acadie. I repeat the unfamiliar pronunciation, Acadie, putting the emphasis in different places than the English Acadia I'd been using. I learned to say it right over a tasting of l'Acadie Blanc, sunshine gold, crisp in contrast to the roundness of French vowels at the Domaine de Grand Pré winery. Later, I listened to Beausoleil's In Search of Acadia, and Acadie is the only French word I recognize as Michael Doucet pulls something true and raw from his fiddle, the minor key clear and keening. Later that afternoon, I stand on the dikes the Acadians built in the 17th century. I learned that Beausoleil takes its name from Joseph Brossard de Beausoleil, a name not far from Babine on the memorial to families deported in Grand Pré. Beausoleil, beautiful sun in a minor key. When I left for Nova Scotia, I knew some of these places, these locations of family sorrow, but I didn't know them with my feet. And I didn't know how far I needed to travel to find where it all started, if such a point was to be found. Standing here alone on the Bay of Fundy turns into a moment where I can watch the timelines of history slide against each other, muddled in what is ancestral family history, contemporary family history, and the future history, legacy I will create on my own. The beautiful sun in a minor key, elusive behind a storm system that has drenched Nova Scotia for the past 3 days, has finally returned, and it brings with it the kind of glorious joy that can only come after suffering days of bad weather while camping. My campsite is only 100 yards from the Bay of Fundy and those magnificent tides, that red water that never changes color, no matter the influence of the sky. In moments when I sat inside my camper at my tiny dinette table with a pot of tea, watching the rain out the front window, I wonder about the land moving here under my feet that I cannot feel, about the geological harmonic resonance created by the tides in this place that I cannot hear. There are places on the planet that hold more gravity, and I did not expect that the Bay of Fundy would become one of them. And this will become part of the stories I will tell about this trip, about this place, how that story would only belong to me. This place, this moment, it isn't a part of a collective identity. It is mine, and it is only mine. I'm starting to understand that there's something about Acadie, this water, these forests primeval, that I'm never going to be able to escape, and that doesn't seem problematic. It's been 4 generations since Babines have stood in this place, and it feels important that the place doesn't let me go easily, that there's a restoration in this kind of storytelling, even if it doesn't look like what I intended. Go find your father, my 7 greats-grandmother, Anne-Marie Landry, tells her eldest, her son, Pierre Babine. She's in her 50s, the mother of 5, sturdy, dark-haired, strong-willed. Pierre is 25, unmarried, and I imagine him tall and dark and lithe, with a face I'd be able to recognize as my blood, and a quicksilver kind of efficient cleverness about him. He has bigger ambitions than marriage, much to the distress of his mother. I have pictures of my father, grandfather, and great-grandfather at about the same age, and I wonder if Pierre and Joseph share their faces. Pierre does what he's told and finds his father standing in just this place where I will stand, on the dikes his own great-grandparents built against the sea so they could farm the land. Joseph is quiet, as he often is, pragmatic in the way of understanding the world that is specific to farmers. Rain's coming in, Joseph says, and Pierre nods, wondering what his father sees in the sky and smells in the air that he does not. We could use a good soaking, Rain. The water is thick and red, but the waves still break pure white, then pull back out, push and pull, push and pull. They stand in silence for a while, watching the fishing boats come in as the tide turns, their friends and neighbors. Where his father smells rain, Pierre smells trouble. Pierre wonders if his mother feels the same. Out of his 5 children, Joseph worries about Pierre the most, the one who will work the land but does not feel it in his bones. He's the one who is more comfortable on the water, changeable but predictable, a force that moves the landscape with its tides. And yet, Pierre will be one of 2 Babins left behind, imprisoned as his parents, siblings, and extended relatives are tossed on a British ship and deported to Maryland. Neither of them know that this is one of the last times they will stand together and watch the water that will soon tear the family apart. But maybe Anne-Marie knows. On my last night in Grand Pre, when the rain has cleared to a setting sun so pure that it creates sundogs, rare in June, I walk the tidal flats looking for rocks. My kindred spirit of a niece has recently taken to collecting rocks, much to the consternation of my sister, who wonders where they'll put them all. And I have already saved for her Thunder Bay amethyst and a perfectly shaped egg of white quartz from Yarmouth. Now, on the tidal flats in Grand Pre, in hours I am not yet willing to leave, I collect petrified wood from what litters the beach. The relics of the forest's primeval, the grain of wood so clear I can see growth rings in the stone, time held in my palm in a way that I can count, measure in tangible form, a history I can physically understand. But the history in the stone in my hand is a dead thing, and it is vaguely wrong. 2 young men in their mid-20s come down the steps to the beach, and I stay long enough to watch them catch the echo of twilight in their kites. This is the best $25 I've ever spent, I hear one of them say, and I think I can hear the melody of a bow in the wind being drawn across the strings in their hands. Thank you. Yes.
I vaguely know a little of this history, but not details.
Mm-hmm.
Could you say something about that separation and why some were left behind and some were removed?
The branch of mine that was not was in prison, and so because the British were being British. So the history of Nova Scotia is that it went back and forth between British and French control for like 100 years. And every time it went back to British control, the British were told the Acadians who were Catholic, you need to swear allegiance to the king. And the Acadians were like, yeah, we're not going to do that. But they didn't have enough military power to back it up. And so in 1755, the British got permanent control of Nova Scotia, had enough military power, and told the Acadians, if you don't swear allegiance to the king, we're going to kick you out, which is basically what happened. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But part of the complication of it, too, is one of the things I kept forgetting as I was working on this is that the United States didn't exist yet. The Declaration of Independence is still 20 years away. And so all of these colonies that they were trying to dump all of these Acadians in had no interest in taking them because they were also Protestant. So this branch of the family who was deported to Maryland, most of them died there. But my 7 great-grandfather and his 3 children, 3 of them, then got on a boat and headed for Louisiana, which I've got some census records from, I think, 1787, and they're all in the Spanish forms of their names, which made my brain go like that. It was like, all right, because the Louisiana Purchase hadn't happened yet. It's still Spanish Louisiana. So that line died out fairly quickly. But so Pierre and his brother got caught up by the British, and they were in prison with a bunch of other Acadians, and so somehow just stayed there until the war was over. The 7 Years' War was over. So they stayed. So they were taken. I can't tell if they were in Fort Beausejour or Fort Edward, which is on the western side of the peninsula. But after they were sent to Halifax. And so after that, then they went down to Yarmouth, which is on the southernmost tip of the peninsula, and they reestablished themselves there. So the Acadians, and I'm not an expert in this history, but the Acadians really did consider themselves to be culturally distinct from other French. So French-Canadians, French-Acadians, they're two separate cultures. And so it's interesting to sort of see where those cultural bits and pieces start to come through, because none of that has trickled down to our family. So it's interesting to sort of, that history is living and breathing and not part of the stories that we tell, which I always am going to find interesting. Yeah. It's a good question.
What about the people that, I think it's Newfoundland or up near the meadows, Lance de Meadows?
Okay.
Are they a people?
Probably not.
Their French is a bit different.
Mhm.
It's older Parisian French. And the village that we visited there had a lot of their history in quilts.
Very cool.
It was very interesting. Yeah.
I love the way that textiles tell a history just as much as anything else. And especially since quilts are largely women's forms of telling stories and passing down histories. I did my PhD in Lincoln, Nebraska, and they've got a giant quilt museum. And the number of stories and such that are stitched into those quilts is just astounding. So yeah, there are many ways that history is recorded.
I also had a book at home, don't know if I still have it, of Acadian folk song
Cool.
in, as you said, a different kind of French.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I still had it. Brought up a lot of memories.
Well, hope they're good ones.
Your detour to Chapleau
Yeah.
meant that you missed some beautiful scenery around Montreal River.
Well, that was in Ontario. So I've been to Montreal.
Montreal River is
The river.
south of Wawa.
Right. You're right. I'm sorry. I misunderstood. Yep. But it's all gorgeous in there. It's so gorgeous.
And the moose. I had a moose run in front of my little Volkswagen Beetle for the longest time because he was a young moose and he didn't know that the way to get away from me was to go into the bush.
Yep.
And he just kept running.
Yeah, they don't know what to do with their legs at that point. No. The next chapter, I saw a bear, and I was like, "You got to be kidding! Like, that's a bear." Yeah. I mean, just right there. Yeah. In the woods, and I'm driving. I can't take a picture of it. So, yeah. Any family historians? People doing family stories?
Can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit more about like how you went about finding your records?
Mhm.
So like my family's been here for a really long time, but obviously nothing was impressive or anything like that.
Yeah.
So what did you do?
I'm going to answer this in two different ways. So there's a lot of family history in my first book because my grandma, she just told stories all the time. And so I just started writing things and writing down stories and whose dad was that? When did that happen? And so it was a lot of, transcription of those sorts of things. But that side of the family saved everything. So, I mean, I've got a box just full of, like, funeral bulletins. They saved everything. And so just going through some of those documents is going to give me some information to get to the next thing. Ancestry is fun, but it also costs a lot of money. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yep. One of the things that surprised me as I got deeper into some of this was that I developed some ethics around family history research that I didn't know that I had. And that maybe I found somebody's tree on Ancestry, but unless I found the records myself and could find a census record or a birth, I couldn't justify adding it to my own stuff. It felt like stealing. And so some of this, especially there was a really good time in the archives in Tuscot, Nova Scotia that I had, in which I'm pretty sure I scared the very young little archivist who was helping me. So I got really excited. But the work of doing that and sort of giving back to the people who had done some of this felt really important. Because one of the threads of this that I love is that if you follow this line back, and then there's a jump if you like that jump, and follow that back, we're descended from the Dukes of Savoy, who once owned the Shroud of Turin. So, but I can't, trace any of that myself, and so it's just a funny story. But on the other side, I travel with my own paparazzi. That was tougher because that side of the family didn't save things and didn't tell those types of stories, and so the research was a lot more computer based at that point. My dad's cousin had done some of this research and had sent me some things, and so I pieced various things together. Like I've got my great-grandfather's naturalization papers, I've got his discharge papers, which is one of the things that sent me into this spiral, because I want to know if he went to France, because that, like if he was on the ground, that might explain the way that his life turned out. But the date on his naturalization papers is the last day troop transports left Hoboken for France. His discharge papers have a stamp that says approved for the Victory Medal, which was only given to troops on the ground in France. And his first language was French. Like, my brain wants to connect those dots, even though I can't actually make that jump. And so the best part of some of this research is like one bit's going to lead to the next bit is going to lead to the next bit, rather than making giant leaps, which I find more satisfying. Or you get into census records and you can see, when their language, their first language changed from one language to another. And there's few ways to know that other than those kinds of records, which I love.
Yes, 3 points, and 2 very quick. One, I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
The second was a question of what you got your doctorate in. And the third is, could you share the emotional journey that you have taken, focusing more on, well, anything in terms of the emotional body. You mentioned about the women.
Mm-hmm.
And focusing perhaps on that as a single woman on this journey, recognizing the roles you each women have played.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll preface that after saying that, is
Yep.
I have followed the journey of my generations of women before me, Baptist missionaries to India, all 5 generations, have yet to go there. And just in that search and meeting my grandmother, who was the last one that was born there, and it's opened up so many feelings, from grief to rage to, excuse the language, what the fuck did you do over there as Baptist
Mm-hmm.
missionaries?
Oh, yeah.
All of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could share.
There's a significant amount of that in any family history. And I don't know. I kind of like those moments where it just stops and your brain's like, wait a minute, what now? It's kind of my favorite. So to answer the largest question, I bought the camper in 2008, which was the summer that I turned 30. My sister was getting married. I was turning 30 that fall. And it was sort of a moment where I was like, what am I waiting for? Like, I had no intention of marriage. I had no intention of children. Like, if I wanted to travel, I should just go. Like, what was I waiting for? And so that was sort of the first jump to, I'm gonna live my life. Like, this is a why not? What's stopping me? And not a thing. But part of it was, and this is, I think, towards the beginning of this, is that that our concept of family was changing. My sister was getting married. We had just been out to California to celebrate Grandma and Grandpa's 50th, 60th wedding anniversary. And I am 30 years old, almost 30 years old, sitting at the kids' table because I am not married. And I was like, at that point, I hadn't done my PhD. Like, I had a master's degree. Like, it's like, okay. There's clearly something that I am being expected to achieve that I am not, and thus kept out of, like, being a full adult in the concept of this particular family. And it was friction is always the best place to start writing. So, like, something just doesn't sit right. And so that's where the writing of this sort of started. Through my 20s, it was clear just how much the world is not set up for solo people, not emotionally or logistically. I came to dread the singles table at friends' weddings, the kids' table at the California grandparents' house, even as Christy and Mike were permitted to sit at the adults' table because they were married and I was not, even though I was 2 years older. There weren't enough people at home to need a kids' table, so it was strange to be separated from older generations until I'd achieved something I didn't know I was supposed to be pursuing. Everything about the world told me my life would only have value once I married, once I had kids, once I grew up, once I settled down. By the time I turned 30, I was really tired of it. In August, back in Ohio to start a new school year, I found my perfect scamp for sale in Cleveland. Within a few days, it was sitting in my driveway. And the idea of solo women traveling, like, that's another story entirely. And that largely, as I started putting this together, there are very few stories that solo women are allowed to have. But a solo woman traveling has been handed a Hollywoodish story framework, establishing tropes of how a woman traveling alone must be afraid or lost or brash or a lesbian or not a lesbian or stuck or unable to change a tire or sexy while skillfully changing a tire. The travel journey required of women, as popularly presented, must be away from a love interest, toward a love interest, toward healing, away from a toxic environment, presumably toward a fuller understanding of identity. So many of these stories are stories of escape, of being in search of oneself or rediscovering oneself, but none of those applied to me. I went alone back to Ireland for the simple reason I wanted to. What was I waiting for? It was a very good question. I didn't travel to go find myself because I'd never lost myself. I wasn't traveling in search of my identity or my place in the world because my family had already built that. I already knew who I was in the context of my family, who I was as an individual. I'd constructed that with my own hands, with the tools in my craftsman tool bag that had been a gift from my father. So the idea of, okay, if none of these are the story that this book was going to tell, how was I going to put that together? So the emotional journey of this book is, what is it like to create your own story as a solo person in a family that is so tight-knit? So, my family is just my sisters, my parents, and now my brother-in-law and the kids. We decided to create our own story. And we did that with a 1972 StarCraft pop-up. And we started camping to create the own story of who we were. And I was like, well, that seems like a natural place to really think about the story that I want to be in charge of. Like, I don't want to let life happen to me. Like, I want to be in the driver's seat. And the camper was a good way to start that. My PhD is in English, with specializations in place-based literature and Irish literature. Yes?
I was just chatting with my almost 30-year-old son, who is planning a cart camping adventure to the west in the fall.
Exciting.
But he and his partner want to take cats. How do you feel? I was skeptical
Yeah.
about the cats, but now that and I will read your book and maybe pass it along, how did that go?
Their idea of roughing it's a Super 8, but I don't know how you do it in a car. So Scamps come in 13-foot, 16-foot, and 19-foot fifth wheel sizes. I have a 13-foot and had the standard sort of arrangement of it with a dinette in the back that made it into a bed. The front had a couch that made it into bunk beds. And the first summer that I owned it, Dad and I took out that front couch and built a 2-person dinette in the front. So I would always have a place to sit, could keep the bed down all the time. And we built it so I could put the kitty litter underneath one of those seats and the porta potty underneath the other. So the cats, like, it is set up for cats now. I don't know how you do it in a car. They travel in their kennels in the Jeep when we're on the road, and I let them. Largely, I take away their food in the middle of the night, and generally they hold it until we get there. Generally, has not been an issue. The pair that camped with me in here has gone to the Great Campground in the Sky. Old age. But the current pair is now 4. And Dublin was 2 months old, I think, when I got him. And he needed a box to get up into the bed. He was so tiny. Cats are, and these are not like put a harness on them, go camping, or like walking, hiking in mountain. These are not these cats. I had replaced the screen door on the camper that summer I got him. And no sooner had I turned around than here he is climbing. I'm like, dude, I just replaced that. He has not changed in 4 years and 20 pounds. He is just a different variety of chaos demon. But more power to him, because even that is like, live the life that you want to live as you want to do it. So if they want to take cats, go for it. Great. Very cool. Yeah. Jonathan.
Yeah. Thematic thread through your whole body of work, like all the way back as far as I know it.
Which is a long time.
But has been the solitude.
Yeah.
And a relationship to the physical world, whether that's objects or food or place, and the way that solitude in a relationship to the physical world can enable the imagination to form community with other people.
Yeah.
Absent other people, or other people that the community's not as much there until there's this solitude and relationship with the physical world, and making companionship out of people who are dead.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can talk about that and your evolution of that. I mean, you even did some of your graduate work in that realm. I'm just wondering if you can talk a bit about, because that seems like if somebody asked me to define your work in a sentence or two, I would want to talk about solitude, relationship with the physical world, and how that's a sort of conduit for the imagination to form.
And identity, too. Yeah. That's a good question. And very, very well put. I think part of that is that, like, I am solo, but I am not alone, and I am not isolated, and I am not disconnected. I just feel like I am my best self on my own. But that doesn't mean that I don't, I've got a very close-knit family, and I've been camping with Dad and Cheryl the last couple of days, and I take my niece and my nephews camping every summer to create some new memories. But I think the thread of that is that we know who we are by where we are. And the places where we find ourselves really do shape how we think about the world, which is one of the questions of this book. Like, my great-grandfather, his life, ended tragically. He grew up in a place of deep instability, like physical instability. Like, the peninsula moves twice a day. And then they moved to Southern California, which isn't any more geologically stable. I grew up, on the Canadian Shield, and you know things about the way that the world works because you know where you are. The place where I grew up is sandy soil, which is really great for potatoes and strawberries, but it erodes like nobody's business. Like, we go to my grandparents' house, we still have it, and I still hear my grandfather's voice, like, don't go down the hill, like, take this other path because the erosion was so bad. But, I remember when I was teaching in Nebraska, and if you haven't read Jonas Agee's novel, The River Wife, put it on your list. It starts with the 1811, 1812 New Madrid earthquakes, and they were so powerful. There were 5 of them that were over 8.0 on the Richter scale. They were so powerful they made the Mississippi River run backwards. Like, it's great. But my students had no idea that the New Madrid fault zone is the strongest fault zone, most active outside of California, and we were living on the edge of it. And there's a difference between California knowing that its land shakes and building to earthquake codes, and St. Louis not knowing, like, what's going to happen. Like, those quakes happen like every 200 years. Like, what's going to happen when that happens again? We lose things when we don't know the land that's underneath our feet. And so a lot of that then is spending time with that landscape and really developing who you are as a person in it. And that takes time, and it takes intention, I think. And I think that's part of it. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it sets up the empathy piece.
Yeah.
Right. That sort of that practice of a relationship with food, with the rest of
Yep.
the relationship with a place, relationship with an object or set of objects, then in your work, the thing I've really noticed is then that sets up capacity for empathy
Yeah.
for other. Everybody has had to do that one way or another.
Yeah.
And even the absent, or even people you never know, or people who are harder access in one way or another.
Yeah.
Which to me is really exciting and
Yeah.
fascinating. And I think I can think of a lot of men who write that way, and then who've written about being on the road. I mean,
Yeah.
I think obvious corollaries to your book are Blue Highways, and Travel with Charlie. But I think you in your preface, I haven't read the book yet. I can't wait to read it today. In your preface, what you say about there's a sort of gap that women are supposed to be writing within this larger narrative, rather than here's my individual relationship with
Right.
the physical world. It's supposed to be inside of a social construct
Right.
instead of just an individual
Absolutely.
relationship, which sets up a kind of empathy then to other human beings.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty great
Yeah.
and groundbreaking.
Thank you. Yeah.
Which I find kind of sad, if I can say, in 2025, that those of us that choose to be intentionally single,
Yeah.
that we have to have some kind of preface or disclaimer.
Or reason or backstory.
Exactly, as opposed to I intentionally choose to be single, period.
Yep. Yep.
As opposed to, but I've been asked a couple of times in my 20s to be married.
Yep.
Or
Yep.
I'm happy, or I have a tight family, or I
Yep.
do love like men, or
Yep.
I'm not a lesbian. F all of that.
Yep.
So it's
We shouldn't have to explain ourselves.
shouldn't have to be. And
Yep.
most of my friends are single women. And I shouldn't even have to say they have a full life, that are accomplished. F all of that. There's such a beauty of that population of us.
Oh, yeah.
And we are
Yeah.
fine-tuned to connect with so much.
Oh, yeah.
So much.
Yeah.
Where our identity is not wrapped up in identity.
In somebody else's identity, even. Or somebody else's identity. Yeah.
Exactly. Or have to say, no, I'm not. Like I said, the
Yep.
whole disclaimer part.
Yep.
I don't do that. I
Yep.
haven't done that in 20 years. I'm not going to do that coming back
Yep.
up here. It's
Yep.
just ridiculous, I say. So let's drop that.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, because I will refer to myself as solo as opposed to be single. Because single, to me, feels like language in search of a double. Or in search of something else. Or something that is incomplete. And I'm not. I mean, it's in the beginning of, like, Mr. Wright might show up, but he's still going to have to live next door. So, and if he wants to camp, he's going to have to get his own camper.
And I'm like, he has to be on another continent for me.
There you go. There you go. Yep. Yep.
Solo has swagger.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. Solo's got swing. Yeah.
Right. Well, it is 4 o'clock, and I want to give you guys time to get your book signed and
Thank you.
have a little chat interaction with Karen. So let's give Karen a big hand.
Thank you for coming.
And, stop by, pick up a copy. Everybody should buy 2 copies. And one for a friend.
Yeah, sure.
Do
Yeah,
that, all right?
absolutely.
And Karen, we got here to sign. Come back for the concert tonight, too.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank